What's up, everyone, and welcome into the Dear Miss Fantasy show with me, your host, Tera Roberts. This is the official mailbag show for Player Profiler. It is Wednesday, May 21st, and I am taking your questions live. And the topic is going to be fun today. I mean, off-season topics. There's some interesting news going on, and I was able to tie in some camp news. But the topic is early round rankings observations. As I am doing best ball drafts, what am I seeing? What am I learning by the early round observations? And what am I learning about my preferences and things that I am leaning into, things that I am a little bit afraid of? Before we dive in, I mentioned best ball drafts, of course. If you are interested in drafting with me, you can do so on Fast Draft. 100% first time deposit match up to $25 with code Tera, Tera. So if you want to jump in on the action, it is super fun. Go ahead and do that. And you can also get $25 off the all-in package with Player Profiler with the same code Tera. And other news too, just real quick before we dive in, NFL players in the Olympics, flag football, it's not anytime soon, but I cannot explain how ridiculously excited for this I am. I'm so glad that they approved this to happen. I'm sure we will all be dreaming up our ideal flag football teams as we progress over the next 3 years, literally. And it'll be fun. It'll be fun to see how that works out with teams prepping for the season, players taking time off. What do we have preseason stuff? How does that lean into? I'm kind of curious if maybe getting them moving and active before the actual season maybe benefits, because we've seen some weird things going on recent years. In my opinion, I'm no expert on injuries and whatnot, but I just feel like players aren't maybe playing enough in preseason and are kind of diving in somewhat cold to the season. So it'll be interesting how that all plays out. But let's go ahead and dive into this topic. Early round rankings observations. The first one that I want to start off with is something that has been, it's kind of been nagging at me recently. The question I have is Jackson Smith and Jigba underpriced? So I have been upping my best ball drafts because, as you guys know, as I said, I've been diving into other sports, particularly with betting and DFS. I've been doing a lot of golf DFS. Got an article out if anyone's interested in looking at that. If you're looking live, it'll benefit you if you're interested in golf DFS for this week's tournament this weekend. I've got 12 lines to do as soon as this show is over in DFS, so that'll be fun. But I have been increasing my best ball drafts here, and I have come away with one big personal takeaway here. I like JSN a lot more than I thought I did. It's funny because when I draft, and not just best ball drafts, but also as we kind of get closer in, we'll be doing mock drafts and redraft for that as well. Dynasty drafts, rookies going on, startups and stuff. And as I draft, it helps me to really come to terms with my rankings and if they're actually in line with what I personally want to do. Because a lot of times when you're doing rankings, you do, it makes sense and projections and whatnot. But then sometimes when you get in there and you start drafting and you look at it and you're like, I don't know if I agree with the way I have this ranked and I need to adjust. And Jackson Smith and Jigba has been one of those guys for me. I have noticed that the ADP on Fast Draft is a lot sharper than other sites, which tells me that you guys that are doing it, you are on to the same thing that I am thinking and everybody else has not caught up. Are we fearful of Sam Darnold? Is there fear of Cooper Kupp? Because honestly, there is no other logical reason to downgrade JSN. He is 27 in Fast Draft ADP and 34 in Fantasy Pros Best Ball ECR. That feels egregious. He's being drafted behind, and it depends on what site you're using and what references you have. But often he's being drafted behind guys like Garrett Wilson, clear quarterback issues. We will talk about that in a little bit. That is also one of the subjects here. Tyreek Hill, quarterback issues as well. Can we trust Tua Tagovailoa? We talked about it last week. We've also got age issues, injury issues. Worry about the wrist with him. Terry McLaurin, volume inconsistency. These are guys that are often being drafted ahead of him. And I want to look at the pros and the cons of Jackson Smith and Jigba and what we can expect from him this season. Now, pros. We will see a change in the offense with Clint Kubiak as the new offensive coordinator. I wish that I could look at Kubiak's 2024 season with the Saints, but it's not, I don't think it's really fair to use that as a reference point of anything to judge an offensive coordinator off of when he had, no offensive players, so to speak. There was only one or two in there. I mean, Alvin Kamara is obviously a big one, but when you have not a single receiver, that's a little bit problematic. But we can look to back when he was offensive coordinator, because I prefer to look at offensive coordinator and see the control that you have over the offense. We can look to Minnesota in 2021. He was fine. No major issues. Cousins and Jefferson had a good season. I mean, was it the best overall, oh my gosh, Kevin Stefanski just turned Kirk Cousins into the Messiah? No, but it was fine. It was a good season for both of them. Dalvin Cook was still in good form. I don't think we should fear the offense tilting aggressively to the ground game based off Kubiak's history. In his preferences and his specialty, he should be focused on the pass. The only concern here, in my opinion, is the risk of Sam Darnold. I fully support Sam Darnold. I've come to fully support Sam Darnold. I like a good comeback story. But I fully support him when he is upright. Behind a poor offensive line, that's asking for trouble. That's the same with a lot of quarterbacks, but, particularly for Sam Darnold, that's something that we have to pay attention to, especially because Seattle's offensive line last season, it wasn't good. They had the second worst final ranking in offensive line in PFF's final grades last season. But the good news is that they know that. They were not delusional about it. They made adjustments to the line. They drafted Gray Zabel in the first. Versatile, very good pick for them. Should help things shape out. We might have to, there might be some growing pains there. We'll talk about growing pains later with offensive lines in a second. But overall, they are going to upgrade their offensive line. There are clear changes here, and it should head in a positive direction. And we just got to hope that it's positive enough to keep Sam Darnold upright. If that happens, I think that JSN is an excellent pick for potential top 10 season out of him to outperform his ADP. And, I love Cooper Kupp, but we'd be lying if we said that we weren't, we didn't see age creeping up on him last season. He's older. I don't think it's a Devontae Adams situation where, Devontae went to New York and we thought, okay, yeah, there are 1, 2, 3 logical reasons as to why Devontae would significantly affect Garrett Wilson. That is not, the reasonings aren't really the same here for Cooper Kupp. I expect JSN to operate as the wide receiver 1. And again, legitimate top 10 potential at wide receiver. I find myself having to fight not to raise him up and be able to take that risk, just because when I look at him and the upside that he could have in best ball, if it all pans out, we saw the flashes of greatness. We've got no DK Metcalf. This should be his offense as the wide receiver 1. There's a significant ceiling there. I want to take out some of the comments here before I dive into before I send us to a little ad break here. We're going to dust them. I'd like to see Kubiak. Yeah. Comment here from Buy and Sell You. I'd like to see Kubiak edit JSN's route tree a little. And I would like to see that too. And I feel positively about his ability to do it. I like that we've got an offensive coordinator whose sole focus over his career has specifically been the pass. So I feel like this is the perfect opportunity for Seattle to upgrade the pass, which has been not that, and I don't want to say Geno struggled, because I don't think Geno struggled last year. Previous season before that, yeah, there were some issues and clear offensive coordinator issues, but not that Geno struggled, but we need to see just an uptick in production from the pass game to raise it up beyond just kind of, average and status quo. So that's what I'm looking forward to here with Seattle, and why I am, I'm finding myself loving JSN. Before I dive into my next early observation from Draft Rankings, we're going to do a little ad break here. And we will be right back after this.
If you play in Dynasty, you need Dynasty Deluxe, our premium package for Dynasty Leaguers. We rank over 300 players, updated every week, all year long. And there's a win now mode and a rebuild mode with Superflex and tight end premium controls. and a Dynasty League sync where you can say, sync down all of my sleeper teams, all my FFPC teams, and then you can browse around your leagues for who has needs, and then you can use our trade finder to see what kinds of trades are happening in leagues that are similar to the one I want to do. Then you can analyze trades using our trade analyzer, which balances the lifetime value, which includes pick values out to like 2028. All of that plus the rookie guide $25 value is included. So if you're just in one Dynasty League, Dynasty Deluxe is well worth it. And use your host's promo code, and you can bump up to All In and get $25 off.
As the Podfather just said, you can use your host promo code, and that's Tera. That's me, Tera. If you want to get down on the action. I'm going to go on to my next early season observation, and I'm posing, you'll see a trend here, I'm posing all of these observations as questions. Observation number 2, will drafting T. Higgins above his ceiling yet again finally work out for us? Because it's high. It's high again. And T. Higgins is one of those players that is being drafted above JSN. It makes you pause and you think about it. I've learned my lesson over time with T. Higgins. I'm sure you can see Tiger. You know, I love T. I've loved him all of his football collegiate life at Clemson. And so I support my man there, but I learned my lesson a long time ago with him. The ceiling is insane, but at the end of the day, right, he is a wide receiver too that typically does not pay off for his ADP, unfortunately. Such is life with Jamar Chase. And there are reasons that he doesn't pay off at his ADP, be that injury issues or inconsistent volume. A new contract does give us some potential assurance there that we could see him finally, not have a multi-game absence from like a sore ankle or something. However, when I look at T for where we are drafting him, it is at his ceiling and there's no way around it. And I'm not opposed to drafting players at their ceiling. Believe me, this is not a preachy thing. I've done it. I don't care. There are certain players that you have to draft at their ceiling. It is what it is. But with T. Higgins, here's the reality is we know what T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, and Joe Burrow look like as a healthy unit for the majority of the season. In that situation, which was, I believe, 2022, I think, T's stats were just over 1,000 yards and 7 touchdowns. That should be the expectation, and that's cool. That's great. But at the end of the day, that is a wide receiver too, and he would not pay off for his ADP. There is some good news, unless, if Trey Hendrickson stays strong in his battle with Cincinnati and somehow manages to get his way out, I fully expect Cincinnati's defense to continue to be a liability that forces them to push high volume through the offense. So that benefits T as well. That has to happen for them to be able to pay off. If Hendricks signs, it would obviously upgrade the defense, especially with the youth there. They'll have, they have excellent pass rushing options there with their first round draft pick and Trey Hendrickson together. But it's probably something that would have to develop as the season goes on. I will say, however, my comfort level with T in best ball is far higher than redraft. When I think about him in redraft, it's a hard no at the ADP, just because the reality is it's just so tough for him to reach that. And even if he does reach it from an overall perspective, the likelihood of it being on a consistent basis, probably not, right? You get one overall wide receiver 1 week, then you follow it up with like a wide receiver 50 week, and then a wide receiver 30 week. And then, maybe he bounce back and give us the top 10. And then it's just, the volatility is frustrating to deal with in season-long leagues. But in best ball, it's a little less cumbersome. The overall is good. You don't have to worry about the week-to-week basis with him. So I can see the argument there. But again, this one is one that is probably the most concerning for me because he is drafted at, or quite frankly, above the ceiling thus far of what we have seen from him throughout his career. It's tough to expect him to be able to ascend to beyond that without some type of injury situation to Jamar Chase. So this one is a wee bit of a problematic one for me. Going to the comments here. Let's see. What's up? How you guys doing? Shout out to Angie Hatfield. How's it going? Show another comment here from Wild Rosie. By the way, if you were listening on the podcast here, you can always tune into the live show. We are live on typically Wednesday evenings at 8 p.m. EST. Going on to my third off-season early observations here with rankings, and it has to do with Indianapolis. The question is all that quarterback fear in Indianapolis causing us to underappreciate Jonathan Taylor? Before I talk about the Colts, I did want to quickly say prayers go out to Jim Irsay's family and friends. We just got the news that he passed away, so thoughts and prayers are definitely with the family and the Colts organization on there. Moving back to JT real quick. JT, we got to look back at last year, compare it to his ADP right now, and try to fully understand breaking down what we have going on with JT, the fear that we have with Indianapolis's offense as a whole and how that affects him, because he is a running back that doesn't have the ability to make things up with receiving through the air. It's got to come on the ground. It's got to come through touchdowns. On Fast Draft, JT has an ADP right now of 18. Feels like a bargain, in my opinion. Fantasy Pros Best Ball ECR, he has an ADP, or Fantasy Pros ECR, he has a ranking of 20 right now. For a guy who is often considered one of the top 5 backs, particularly in Dynasty, when we look at him, the fact that he is still in his prime and he is coming off what is, in my opinion, an underrated season, considering all of the turmoil that happened there. I understand the fear with Jonathan Taylor. The trust issues, obviously, with staying on the field. Last year, 14 games. Year before that, 10. Obviously, there were some mitigating issues. Before that, 11. Quarterback situation is a major issue. But I wanted to understand exactly what the major issue was and try to contextualize it and break it down. So I looked through games last season with Jonathan Taylor and Anthony Richardson to try and bring together some positive takeaways to understand what I think is extreme value that we are getting on Jonathan Taylor at his current ADP, this discount that we're getting here. The reality is that there was a lot of variability in the performances, and breaking them down just makes a lot more sense. There were games where Jonathan Taylor was DOA with Anthony Richardson at quarterback, but you could argue that that might have just been matchup induced, and maybe not really. Anthony Richardson in the quarterback situation is a problem. I feel like we might be overselling the quarterback being a major issue for Jonathan Taylor. Anthony Richardson and Jonathan Taylor played together weeks 1 through 3 last year. Jonathan Taylor had over 100 yards on the ground and in two of those games, and two touchdowns in one of those games. Anthony Richardson and Jonathan Taylor played together in week 8. In that week, Jonathan Taylor had over 100 yards on the ground and a touchdown. Weeks 11 through 13, that was a terrible, terrible stretch leading up to the fantasy playoffs. It was traumatizing, and I think that is the fresh memory that we have of trying to make that playoff push if you roster Jonathan Taylor, and have it being so underwhelming at just the exact wrong time that we needed for him to put up strong performances. I remember the frustrations people had of him failing prior to the playoffs, getting knocked out, and then having him go off in the playoffs. It was very interesting how that happened. But breaking down the weeks 11 through 13 bad stretch, under 60 yards in 2 of those games. The final game, he did almost reach 100 yards, but he was saved by a receiving touchdown. But for context, those games where he had under 60 yards were against the Jets and Detroit. The final game where he had almost 100 yards and the touchdown was against New England. You could make the argument and say, okay, Jets, Detroit. Detroit was a very tough run defense. Jets up and down, but overall strong defensive unit. Him having under 60 yards in those games. is not ideal, but kind of understandable and maybe not the fault of the quarterback as much as it was that we would just like to see him in better matchups there. They happen. They happen to everybody. Now we jump to weeks 15 and 16, over 100 yards against Denver, no touchdown. And then 16 was obviously that over 200-yard performance at the 3-touchdown game that everyone went crazy about because they could not actually reap the benefits of it. Overall, it is up and down, right? But I'm not seeing a direct correlation to Anthony Richardson being the starting quarterback, meaning that Jonathan Taylor can't have a good game. That does not appear to be the case. There will be ups and downs, obviously, such as the case with a guy that gets the majority of his production on the ground and you get to a matchup where you're hitting a wall and you don't have the receiving options to be able to push forward on that. But overall, I'm relatively encouraged. On 14 games, this man had 303 carries, over 1,400 yards, and 11 rushing touchdowns. Yes, we wish there was receiving upside, but that is an excellent season, especially considering the turmoil that they went through and the fact that I had to kind of break down games where they played together because there was that massive inconsistency in, unfortunately, Anthony Richardson and benching and availability and all that good stuff, not so good stuff. Jonathan Taylor being able to do that over 1,400 yards in what was objectively a bad season. Come on now. Am I saying that it's going to get better with Anthony Richardson this year? Do I think Daniel Jones is the answer? Probably not. Maybe it'll be that. That would actually be genuinely hilarious there. But I am saying that Jonathan Taylor is getting a discounted ADP because of that. And where he stands, I feel super comfortable drafting it. And I feel like I'm getting a deal on an elite player there, particularly in best ball, where that volatility of the 60-yard game because he faces a tough Denver defense, that doesn't matter. So moving on to my fourth early observation this season. And I mentioned it earlier when I was talking about JSN and players being drafted above him. And one of those players was Garrett Wilson. And that brings me to this early season observation. I think we should put a little more trust into Justin Fields. Am I crazy for feeling that way? Let's talk about it. I fully trust Justin Fields as a fantasy quarterback. That is not the issue here. I do question the level of trust that I should have with Fields to Garrett Wilson for Garrett Wilson's fantasy value. And as I continue to question it, go back and forth, I think we need to be a little bit more trusting of Justin Fields. Now, some news did come out today regarding his performance in practice. We saw him in action. We saw him with Garrett Wilson. They did 7-on-7. Solid performance. They said there was zip on his throws. That's good. We like to see a strong arm. There were some standout passes, one to Garrett Wilson in particular, to the other to Allen Lazard, who I fully expect at some point to be on his way to meet Aaron Rodgers, wherever Aaron may be. And then they did full team. And the Jets' offensive line had major protection issues. Fields was sacked on 6 of 10 dropbacks. He did complete, the remaining of his passes, 3 of 4, a couple of dump offs, nothing really spectacular in the full team work. Had some ugly throws. It was a rainy day, cold, rainy, windy. Hello, New York. But I do caution people to not overreact on this news because this comes out, and I was looking at the comments on, the post on Twitter that came out, and the comments were obviously, Justin Fields sucks. We expect this. We expect him to get sacks, blah, 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 whatnot. Offensive line bad. Yes, but there are two things that we know. One, Justin Fields is factually a bad passer behind a bad offensive line. 2, the Jets' offseason moves did focus on the line. but I wouldn't expect it to look good immediately. This is early. They're practicing, they're working through it. I have faith that this unit will improve behind a good line. I like the investments that the Jets made into the line. It shows that they are fully aware that they need to protect Justin Fields. It's just going to take some time for them to get together as a unit, because you have to remember there's youth development in there. They have got their first round draft pick in Mimbu that needs to develop and get comfortable within the line. They've got new players moving around. So just kind of keep that in mind as well, and not overreact to news of the fact that their defense is looking a lot more aggressive and able to overtake the offensive line right now. That makes logical sense. I think we should expect that. I'm more comfortable with hearing that in the reality of it than, let's say, a couple of years ago when we kept hearing super positive news about Daniel Jones and Darren Waller out of preseason and minicamp. And it turns out that the reason for all that positive news was because their defense sucked, so they were tearing it up. This is the opposite situation where the defense is looking fantastic and they're tearing up the offensive line. It is building character, and the offensive line is going to come together as a unit as they progress forward, especially having to play against that defense, which Aaron Glenn is clearly turning around early. I feel like it'll move in a positive direction here. I don't mind the ADP for Garrett Wilson. It is a little bit risky, but we know that he is a high volume receiver. He needs to have that high volume. Is Fields a high volume passer? He can be. I don't expect them to push the pass aggressively, but I do expect there to be a hyper focus on his wide receiver one, because that's just what Justin Fields does, right? Recall DJ Moore and the usage that he got, the attention that he got from Justin Fields. The first read is his favorite, right? It doesn't really go beyond that. So Garrett Wilson can thrive with Justin Fields. We just need the offensive line to move into a positive direction. So pay attention to that and the progress that they make in order to kind of be able to make your judgments and gauge what we can expect out of the passing game and whether or not we'll get good protection from that offensive line for Justin Fields. Showing a comment here from Buy and Sell You, targeting JT everywhere because of his ADP. It's juicy, right? It feels like we've got some, and I call it, fantasy football PTSD. When you've gone through some stuff and you feel like a player let you down and then came through at the wrong time and it just didn't line up for you. It didn't help you from a fantasy perspective in any way, shape, or form. We often say, hey, it's not just bad luck. It's just that we don't need to draft him. When in all actuality, it could just be bad schedule alignment and bad luck situations. The overall result was fine. The ADP is strong. I feel like we're getting a solid deal on JT. I'm leaning in on that one. Now, one more observation here, early round observation here. This one is fun. There is clearly no fear of volatility at the tight end position, and I question, should there be? It's very interesting because after, year after year after year, we fall victim to trusting tight ends more than we should. We know it's a volatile position. We know that, unfortunately, it doesn't take much for these guys to not pay off at their ADP. And this one is interesting because in particular with Brock Bowers and Trey McBride, those are the two that are going very high in drafts right now. Bowers is going at the 1-2 turn. It is rich. It is rich. I mean, it's deserving. Don't get me wrong here. Love Brock Bowers and what we saw from him in year one. My God. I mean, you just kind of think it's not the second coming of Travis Kelce. It could something beyond that, right? And then McBride is going at the back half of the second. Again, another high volume guy. But I find it interesting because we just saw Sam Laporta go from the number one tight end to a guy that could not hit double-digit fantasy points consistently. It just happens so easily with tight ends, unfortunately. And it is kind of the same situation where now McBride does have more tenure under him, so that is a different situation. But Bowers, second year here. So, talking about these guys, I do think that Bowers and Laporta are unlikely, I will say, to suffer the same fate because they are volume guys, and being a volume first look tight end does mean less variability in your production. Sam Laporta's I don't want to say downfall because it was a fine year. He was still a tight end one. He was still a top 10 tight end, but it was frustrating. And the production that he put out for where you were drafting him, it was not even close. You took a major hit if you went that direction. But he was thriving on touchdowns. It wasn't really shocking that was happening because when you get somebody that is touchdown dependent, like for instance, we were talking about earlier, guys that are going above Garrett, or not Garrett Wilson, guys that are going above Jackson Smith and Jigba. Terry McLaurin, one of those reasons is that's a guy that's touchdown dependent. I love what I saw out of him last year. I get mildly concerned if we see a little bit of dip. That's something that's real with these guys that are not high volume, and there's less risk associated with the volume guys, but I will caution there is some risk associated here. When we look at Trey McBride, it's very, very possible that Marvin Harrison Jr. could ascend in Arizona. In fact, I find myself kind of loving Marvin Harrison Jr.'s ADP and not being afraid to lean into it. When we look last year at Arizona, it was a massive disappointment because we were overdrafting him. I say I did it. Particularly in best ball. I did not do it in redraft because it just got a little bit outrageous in redraft, and I'm not willing to take the level of swing that I am in best ball on a rookie wide receiver. But I did push that ADP up myself, and we overdrafted him, and it is what it is. But the year as a whole, when you kind of push that out of your mind in terms of what his ADP was, and you look at the year as a whole, for the production that he had, and considering the fact that he was blatantly misused, and considering the fact that the offense as a whole looked very confused, it was fine considering everything that went wrong. Year one, that is something that can be easily built upon to create a top 12 wide receiver. And if that does manage to happen, Trey McBride's volume would likely suffer, and he does not have the touchdowns to be able to counteract that. And while he would still be fine, probably wouldn't hit that second round ADP. I have not found myself drafting Trey McBride in the second. It feels a little much there. I'm willing to pass that up and then go with Marvin Harrison Jr. With Brock Bowers, he is getting the quarterback upgrade. We cannot deny that one, but there are additional mouths to feed in the offense. In particular, obviously, Ashton Genty. They could lean on the ground game with Genty and in the air as well. From a pass catching perspective, that is very much a reality there, that he can take some of that short work as well that was benefiting Bowers. Then we have the addition of Jack Bash, who is someone that I like to make a year one impact. I do not expect him to take over, get more volume than Brock Bowers. I don't expect that whatsoever. But if Bash and Myers can put together consistent season, plus the work on the ground from Genty and his receiving work, yeah, you know what? There's a reality where Bowers could suffer enough volume to make his ADP a risk. I haven't taken him yet either. Now, granted, he is spectacular. And if he continues this through season 2 and benefits with the upgrade to Geno Smith, it won't be an issue. But if you're a little bit risk averse on that and you're just preferring to kind of go with the trend of sometimes tight ends, that volatility from a year to year basis, not being 100% reliable, those are some aggressive ADPs. But it's funny, no matter what tight ends do to us, no matter what happens, unfortunately, we just kind of continue to love the tight ends. I'm sure at some point in drafting, we'll make the leap and, take the pick. But from what I've seen, particularly with Bowers, there's no drop in ADP. It's not getting past you. It's not a situation where you're sitting late second and you're saying, man, if he drops, I'm going to take him. Absolutely. But it's not happening there, unfortunately. So just to recap there, with the early round observations with rankings, we talked about JSN being potentially underpriced here for the level of upside that he has. We talk about T. Higgins being overpriced, but that is not new. Drafted at his ceiling. A little bit concerning there. We talked about Jonathan Taylor and the fact that he is being a little bit underappreciated here. We got a man with double-digit touchdowns on the ground, plus 1,400 yards on the ground. My God. And we're treating him like little stepchild. Yeah. Underappreciated there on Jonathan Taylor. And Justin Fields, should we put a little bit more trust into him? Yeah, a little bit. We be cautious about it. We know what we need to get from him. We need to have strong protection to be able to keep him upright and not panic throwing on the run. And that is where, as we got a comment here in the chat, that is where the off target throws happen when he doesn't have that protection. Then the fifth one that we had in terms of observations is clearly no fear of volatility within the tight end position, with two tight ends going extremely high, which makes it interesting. If you manage to hit on a tight end that is in mid rounds or a little bit later, you would have a significant advantage on the teams that do end up leaning into those players at those lofty ADPs. A couple more comments here from you guys just to make sure that I got everything. Have a hard time drafting tight ends so early from Wild Rosie. Yeah, I typically do too. There are occasions where if I'm looking around at ADP and I don't see anyone that I like, I'll say, okay, rather than taking a receiver I don't believe in, I'll take a tight end here. But with where Bowers and McBride are going, there's so much that you can like around there. You're making the decision between drafting Bowers and a Devon Achane, the upside of a true overall RB1. We talked about, I think, last week or the week before, I can't remember, but we talked about, what happens if Tua Tagovailoa manages to stay healthy the entire season. That's another one where the payoff for the ADP would be absolutely outrageous. Kyron Williams is going after Brock Bowers, multiple strong wide receivers. There's so many different directions that you can go that I have a hard time leaning into it. I don't blame anyone that does lean into it, because at the end of the day, it is Brock Bowers, it is Trey McBride. The talent is high, the volume is high, and there's a lot of positive directions that we could see this Vegas offense go. But at the end of the day, it is it is a risk. It is a risk. Let's see. From Kipston, you got in. You're late, but you got in just in time, because this will be. Unless you guys have any other questions in the chat, of course I can answer them. But I was going to close us out just a little bit early here. But from Kipston, may have missed it, but how do these guys move up in tight end premium from half point to full point for tight ends only? It's tough to Bowers, it's tough for him to move any higher than he is right now, just because he is going at that 1-2 turn. And often I'm not seeing a lot of variability in it. 12 or 13, that seems to be the locked in position for where he's going, and I'm not seeing it drop. So in tight end premium, I don't think it moves up too much. It does make that 1-2 turn very much so more justifiable for him. McBride too as well, going at the end of the second. Again, because they're so much higher, I don't see a lot of movement with them. What I do think that we see is the gap lengthen from the tight ends that are going behind them, like a George Kittle. I don't have ADP. How quickly can I bring up ADP right here? George Kittle's ADP. I can't bring that up that quick. I want to say it's around 50 something. Let me double check. I was trying to bring it up on my phone, but that wasn't working out. But I do have the Fantasy Pro 43. The Fantasy Pros ECR has him at 43. And I want to say ADP and draft was kind of in a somewhat similar range, somewhere between 40 to 50. And that's a significant gap. So we're talking a multi-round gap between George Kittle as the tight end 3, all the way up to Trey McBride, who is going mid to late second round. So that's a pretty significant gap there. In tight end premium, I can justify the upgrade of Kittle. I can't push McBride or Brock Bowers much higher just because of the amount of talent that is being drafted around them. But I think what we'll see in tight end premium is the leap of Kittle. I have not done a tight end premium draft. I have obviously one coming up in July with the Scott Fish Bowl. So it'll be, those always go super high. But yeah, I think the value there for Kittle will jump up a little bit. Our newly contracted George Kittle with our newly contracted Brock Bowers and our hopeful breakout of Ricky Pearsall. But yeah, that is it on the tight end premiums. Honestly, I don't see there being a significant amount of room to be able to move up for the top 2 guys just because they're already tilted so aggressively high. I mean, Bowers would have to, let me look real quick and see who Bowers could actually even jump. Bowers probably could jump Brian Thomas, and that's it. That's one that he's kind of right in there with the range. But beyond that, I don't see a reality where over guys like Malik Neighbors, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Puka Nacua, I just kind of that range seems like the cutoff to where we can't push him up much higher. So to me, Bowers is going in the range where I would take him in tight end premium. So that says a lot for where he's going in half point and full point PPR without the extra tight end premium there. I think that does say a lot for the way that he is being drafted. But other than that, I appreciate you guys joining in. Be sure to, well, do I have anything else? No, that covers it. Appreciate you guys joining in as always. If you would like to, it would be greatly appreciated to subscribe to the podcast on all platforms if you are not already subscribed. If you're on YouTube, make sure that you're subscribing to Player Profiler and Player Profiler Now, because that is where we go live from. And then also, if you're in the mood for one more subscription, you can follow me and subscribe to me on It's Tera Time on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, pretty much everywhere. As a reminder, we'll be continuing to talk draft and best ball and whatnot throughout the entire season. And I'll be showing you guys some of the fast drafts that I'll be doing. I might even do some live in case anyone wants to join in and draft with me. But if you want to download Fast Draft and make a deposit, you can use promo code Tera, TERA, to get that $25 first time deposit match. Appreciate you all joining in. As always, I will see you again next week. Have a wonderful week. Hopefully we get awesome, positive football news of all of our players that we love doing fantastic. Talk to you again next week. Peace out, guys.